I'm Bill, K0OMD. I'm going to tell you a story tonight. Some of it might be true. Some of it I'm going to make up because I wasn't there. I did not plan this. John did not plan this. We got dragged in as it was going on. So, first off, how many of you know what POTA is?
You got dragged in?
I'm sorry?
Were you in the gondola when you got dragged in?
No. How many of you know about POTA? Okay, then I don't have to cover this at all. You know what POTA is about. How many of you have been out in the park and activated? You go out a few times, you start thinking about, what can I do different? You know, maybe that antenna didn't work, maybe I want to build an antenna, learn CW, do QRP. I love doing 5 watts. Cuts down on the crowd and it just makes it a calmer activation. But at some point you'll run into this, what else is there? Can I do something that nobody's done? I don't need that one, you already know it. So you gotta look at something unique. So how do you get to, let's do a hot air balloon. Well, you might be sitting around a warm afternoon, a little bit of adult beverage, thinking about, you know, I was out with Cousin Floyd. He's got a balloon. He's a pilot. Can we do radio in a balloon? Well, a conversation with Cousin Floyd says, yeah, you can do a radio. Yeah, well, free flying and staying inside a park, we don't have a rudder, we don't steer, we go where the wind blows us. But we can tie it down. Turns out, well, Cousin Floyd knows about it, but he doesn't do that very often. So we go out and talk with Scott Woge of LTA Services. He does tethered flights. He does a lot of them. He's got a really nice basket. You'll see some photos of it later. Scott's a ham, and he's all over it. Yes, not only can you do all this stuff, but I'll bring my balloon. I'll bring my nice new basket. I'll fly for you. And it didn't cost us anything. So now the problem is all the other things you have to do. Usually when you're doing a POTA, you kind of sneak in, you go quiet, you stay out of everybody's way. There's no way to keep a 75-foot tall, brightly colored balloon quiet. Everybody in the park is going to know you're there. You're going to park some trucks out in the grass. So you got to ask the park. You got to find a big space. Pere Marquette State Park has a great space down by the river, all kinds of room. And it happens that Lewis and Clark Radio Club, that some of us are a member of, has a really good relationship with that park. We've supported trail runs there for years. When me, on the outside, thought, there's no way we'll get permission, the park manager jumped on it, said, sounds great, we'd love the publicity, but I got to talk to the state. Okay, the state comes back, about 3 weeks, says, you're good to go. Here's your permit. Okay, we've got a balloon, we've got a space, we need some operators. Actually, the operator call came in early when we thought it was going to be Cousin Floyd's balloon, because he's got a balloon and he's a pilot, but he doesn't have a crew. And it takes a few people to put a balloon in the air. So 5 more operators were recruited, including myself, my wife, Dave over there in the funny hat, and a couple other guys from Jerseyville. We all do POTA. We all happen to know the organizer, who's the guy sitting next to Dave. Dennis, 89WN, is the guy who got to enjoy all the ulcers of all the twists and turns of, yeah, we can do that. Can we get a permit? Yeah, we got a permit. We got a pilot. Oh, and at the last minute, the pilot, Scott, had a family emergency and couldn't make it. But John will tell you a little bit about the replacement. So we're out there. We can do it. What do we need? First line, yeah, we used an IC 7300. There was a lot of Ford versus Chevy picking the radio. 4 of us are Yaesu guys. 2 of them are ICOM guys. We ended up with that radio because it has a built-in capability to record your audio. So we have a full audio recording of both sides of the activation. Turned out we didn't need it. Nobody missed a call. Heil Pro 7 headsets. Balloons are noisy. And that burner is about there. So without the headset, you're not going to hear anything. With the headset, we could operate right through the burner. Didn't bother us at all. Didn't bother the other end. Antenna. Got a 40-foot infed or 40-meter infed hanging off the basket with a tennis ball at the bottom so the ground crew can find it and pull it out of the way when we come back down. Worked beautifully. John, with his balloon system, and tied off with 3 trucks out in the grass. I never knew how you tied off a balloon to tether, but 3 trucks did it. The operators, Dennis, 89WM. Like I said, he planned it all. He came up with the big idea, suffered the ulcers, and dragged the rest of us into it. N9VFR, big time POTA operator, first guy to do 50 state activation. Dan and Mark are from Jerseyville. I met them at the morning of the activation. K0KST happens to be my activation partner and my wife. And me, last guy on the list. So we flew in pairs. Dennis did a flight to make sure we were tuned up, had a frequency, came back down. Dave and Dennis went up, did an activation, came down. Dan and Mark back up, came down. Betty and I finished it off. Each of us did about 15 to 20 contacts. And it took us an hour and 15 minutes.
How high did you go up?
We were up 75 feet. Had to be high enough to get that 66-foot antenna off the ground. So 75 feet. It was as much fun as possible. The crew. Lynn Brownell was a stand-in pilot. I think she took the day off from work because she likes to fly balloons that much. And she was a great pilot. I spent my career in flight test working with Air Force trained test pilots. This young lady would fit in perfectly. She knew what she was doing and she was in charge. Scott was the owner. John, also a ham, didn't tell us that while he was there because he was busy being ground crew and chief and making sure everything was double checked. And a couple other balloon guys came up just because they liked balloons. Those guys are as crazy as we are. Recruited John Nell, K9JDN, to do some professional photography. And of course, Dennis recruited his wife and daughter to come and help, and we got a reporter. Ron has written an article. Hopefully it'll get published in QST. I understand it's been submitted. Okay, how do I do this?
Just click on it.
Oh, just click on it, that's right. We're on my machine now.
CQ Parks on the air, CQ Parks on the air. This is Alpha Delta 9 reaching up, activating Kilo 1015 from the hot air balloon.
It was a beautiful day, November 1st of last year.
CQ Parks on the air. This is Alpha Delta 9 Whiskey Mike calling CQ, CQ. CQ Parks on the air, CQ Parks on the air. This is Alpha Delta 9 Whiskey Mike activating Kilo 1015 from a hot air balloon.
Did you have anyone spotting you?
We were spotted.
Kilo 9 Echo Delta Golf, you are 59 into Kilo 1015 hot air balloon.
QSL, it's actually Delta Echo Golf, Kilo 9 Delta Echo Golf, and you're like 40 over here in Wisconsin, 59 Wisconsin, and I'm in a reach
Okay, I'm gonna let the video play for a
How many
while.
watts on that?
I'm sorry?
How many watts?
100 watts.
Okay.
No, were we running 100? Yeah. There was some disagreement over whether we were going to 100 or 50,
Yeah.
but yeah. We'll have a map later of where we made contacts, but you can see it was a beautiful day out there. It was finally warm once you got in the balloon with that big bucket of hot air above you. It was 28 degrees that morning.
So did you have a battery booster or just straight off the battery?
We have to bring everything. We brought everything. We have you're running a LiFePO4 battery, right? Yeah. So you don't need anything but that battery. It's running at 13 volts, even loaded.
Okay, so no battery booster.
No. Okay. All right. Let's see if I can get to the next slide.
Click on the image and then try doing the arrow.
Come on, you.
Or hit escape. Yeah.
There we go. Shots in the air. First two guys up, already making contacts. You can see a little bit here. There's about 25 feet of coax wrapped around the basket, and no counterpoise, a choke at the radio. These are the two guys that couldn't make it today, KD9EFO and KD9LON, getting their brief and getting ready to go. And yours truly and K0KST coming back down, the activation's done. The nice thing about that was we were up and down, the hunters held our frequency for us. We didn't have to go clear a frequency. They stuck around, kept the frequency busy, come back up, tell them I'm back in the balloon, and you're back to operating. That's the kind of people that POTA folks are. Shot from above.
So had you pre-tested your antenna system and you knew what you needed to do, or did you do it on the fly?
Made one lift to make sure the antenna worked. And after that, no adjustments, same frequency. Fortunately, no adjustments because I run a Yaesu and it was an ICOM and I have no idea. I couldn't have changed the volume on the radio.
Yeah.
How tall was the antenna?
It's a 66 footer. It's hanging down.
So halfway at 40 meters.
Yep.
How long between turning on the heater and stopping it and then letting it?
He's going to answer all the balloon questions. I know nothing about it. This is the first time I have ever been in a balloon. See, that's the motley crew that were up in the balloon after everything was over.
How many folks do you have in the basket?
At a time,
Yeah.
pilot, 2 operators.
Okay. And a battery, heavy battery.
LiFePO4 battery. It's 20 amp hour, weighs about 5 pounds.
So lithium ion.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Was your pilot in that picture?
No.
No. Okay.
We do have a picture of her, don't we?
We do.
Okay.
We do.
John, yours for a while. I'll come back when we get to the end of the slides and answer questions.
Okay, so you know everybody gets involved in ham radio. It's like, why did you get involved in it? A lot of people say, John, why the hell did you get involved in hot air ballooning? In all honesty, I was chasing a skirt. She went her way. I went into pilot school, met my wife now, and that's all kind of history. That was back in, I got my certificate in 2003. Where are we at?
Space bar or anything.
I'm sorry?
Any key.
Space power. Any key will do it.
Okay, so with this whole event, we started planning as soon as Don had provided the NDAs that we signed. Scott and I talked over quite a bit about where we were going to be up there, what were we expecting in the way of conditions. It was 23 degrees, 28 degrees. So, there are extra precautions that we had to take. We had to make sure that the tanks were all kept warm the night before so that when we got out there, we didn't have any O-ring issues or anything along those lines. But I say here our day started way before sunrise that morning. Actually, I made my first call to National Weather Service at 11:30 the night before to double check what the weather forecast was for in the morning. I mean, with the, even if you're going to be tied off, there are still some restrictions. We have picked trucks and cars up off of the ground in the wrong conditions, and they can change instantly. So, as crew chief, that was one of the things I worked with. Lynn also got her weather briefings and everything. The last briefing that we got then was at 5 a.m. Got up, called National Weather Service, got into a couple of other weather-related resources that we use, and the decision was decision time, go or no go. My God, we're going to fly. We're going to do this thing. The weather forecast was from the winds were going to be from the southeast at 8 to 9 miles an hour until 8 a.m. and from 8 a.m. until 10. The actual winds were 18 to 24
What was the date?
at 10 o'clock,
The date?
November 1, 2023. The surface winds were supposed to then be southeast at 15 to 20 after 10 a.m. The location that they picked for us to set the balloon up in was down along the channel. We had a great wind break. Our actual conditions at the time of our operation were the wind was from the southwest at 5 to 7. 8's kind of our limit, so we were ready to go. Our balloon, the category of hot air balloons is called lighter than air. There is nothing lighter than 250 pounds, I'm telling you. But in our van, we carry our basket, our fan, extra fuel tanks, the envelope. The balloon basket is carried on a lift that's on the back of the truck. So we arrived, I think it was just about 8:30 in the morning to start setting up. And you'll see that we're down in a little bit of a valley here in that we've got trees surrounding us. And to our back, as you're looking at this picture, is the channel. So we had a couple of barges go by while this was going on. So we've gotten the basket out. We've gotten the burners and everything out. They are assembling the balloon. Whoops, let me go back. Left arrow. Oh, left arrow, okay. So the crew is in the process right now. This is Lynn, Aaron, Nick, and myself. We're assembling everything. You have the basket here, uprights, burner assembly up here. All that has to be put together and connected and everything to go after we've picked our position. So we're ready to go. The balloon equipment, the balloon itself, the envelope, is a Lindstrand USA. AX80 is its category. Whoops. And a model 90A. The 90 designates how many thousands of cubic feet of air this balloon will hold. When I was flying regularly, we would land in subdivisions and schoolyards and places like that. So we always had kids around, and we'd take them for tether rides because then they would think it was really neat. They would help us pack up, kind of forced free labor, But I always challenged them to go home, do a little bit of math, figure out what the size of their bedroom is in cubic feet, length, height, width, and then how many of their rooms could fit inside a 90,000 cubic foot balloon? They always thought it was fun. Anytime we identify our equipment, we identify our FAA registration, which is N126 Lima Bravo. We had, actually it's 3 20-gallon tanks of fuel in there.
What is the fuel?
Propane. Propane. And because we had kept the tanks warm, we didn't have to charge it with nitrogen. If the balloons had been sitting out all night, we would have taken those tanks and charged them with nitrogen to add additional pressure.
How many backup igniters do you have?
2 redundant systems. We have 2 burners, 2 igniters, 2 fuel systems. It's just like any aircraft. This is a certified FAA aircraft. Like my license, my tickets are all FAA authorized. I go through school, I go through testing and things like that to learn how to do all this stuff. More importantly, learn what the rules are.
Did you do a check ride in a balloon?
Oh yes, check rides. You have to do. You have to have currency, which is 3 flights with landings within a 90-day period to be able to take people. I hold a commercial certificate, so as a commercial pilot, I can charge for my rides. I can charge for advertising for an event. I'm a certified flight instructor, and I love the sport. So Lynn Brownell was our PIC, our pilot in command. As Bill said, I don't know if she left or avoided work that day. Lynn is a chemical engineer. Moved to St. Louis about 2.5, 3 years ago. She had just gotten her balloon pilot's license. She is now has some kind of fixed wing aircraft, and she's flying for a living. So I think it was one of her days off, or she wasn't going to do her flight jump until later in the afternoon. I was the crew chief, which I was responsible for all the ground operations. Lynn was in control once that balloon took off from the ground. Before that, I was in charge. The system, as Bill has said, was provided by Scott Woge from LTA Services. Scott is from a ballooning family. His wife is a commercial pilot. His daughter is a commercial pilot. His son-in-law is a commercial pilot. His daughter, and I keep forgetting to ask Scott about this, his daughter is in her early 30s. 4 years ago, maybe it was 5 years ago, I worked with them as a ground crew data capture person when she went on a flight and set 9 world records.
Is that the one you came and presented here about?
How does that happen?
Well, there's all different kinds of categories. Dead of winter, when they took off, it was 18 below zero. Fuel tanks strapped all the way around the basket. So it was a long day, but we were using repeaters she took off from South Dakota, ended up in Iowa. Ended up in northwestern Missouri.
A lot of wind.
A lot of wind. She was in the jet stream. Her highest speed was 98 miles an hour. But the great thing about flying in the winter is you don't feel the wind. So you don't get the wind chill factor. You just dress for the cold and you're golden.
And you got a big heater above you.
Got a big heater up there. This is our PIC, Lynn Brownell. We pulled the basket or the envelope out. She's going to get it out. She has to do some preliminary inspections of it before we start, as we're pulling it out, to make sure that everything is in working order.
What's your typical flight altitude when you're doing something like
I'm sorry?
Iowa?
Her altitude was just shy of 18,000 feet.
So
She had to have oxygen.
you run a transponder
Yes.
And what do you squawk at that altitude?
I don't know what her IDs were. I was just following. We had borrowed some transmitters and that from the Carols and things like that, and we were using those for tracking the balloon over APR.
So are you considered VFR at that?
Yes, we strictly fly VFR.
So you follow the 500 offsets, even odds, based on direction?
In theory, yeah.
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 Thank you. In theory, right.
Well, I mean, you know,
Did you have
we have the right of way in a hot air balloon.
You're the least maneuverable.
So yeah, so they, you know, planes and jets and helicopters and all those things have to yield to us.
You have the highest priority.
Right. So here we're setting up the basket. You'll notice in this basket, this is a very unique one, it actually has a hinged door on it. This really helped in the process of getting our passengers in and out, because there is no graceful way to get in and out of that balloon if you don't have a door. And
Or 2 ladders.
oh yeah, or 2 ladders, yeah. Here's our fan that we use for cold inflation. The burner, now most people will look at this as we get into another picture, and you'll see that the burner frame is attached to the envelope. And you'll think that the basket and everything's hanging from there. They're actually from the carabiner up on the corner. These cables here run down, all the way down underneath and come back up on the other side. So actually what's happening is we're tied to the cables, but the cables are actually holding the balloon basket in place. And that's Aaron. Aaron here is a pilot for Amazon. And Nick is an entrepreneur that does lawn service and several other things.
Do you have any instruments on that? Let's say like an altimeter.
We'll have an altimeter, yes.
And do you have to reset it at the 18,000 mark?
No, no.
Why is that?
Well,
Is it a radar?
the thing is, altimeters are out now. Now it's all digital.
Right.
You know, we have a transmitter on the balloon. Mm-hmm. We have a receiver down here. It's reading our altitude. It's reading our temperature of the envelope. Altimeters, I'll tell you what, they don't like electric current. I found that out the hard way. But the hinged door is becoming a new thing in ballooning. There was one gentleman went to the ballooning companies, Lynn Strand and Cameron, who are the 2 biggest in the United States. He wanted a basket where he could take people that were bound to wheelchairs and other handicaps and things like that and help them design these baskets with doors in them. Now they're becoming very popular because you go to events and you're nothing worse than taking a sponsor up and the sponsor's wife comes along. It's not a big deal, but she's wearing a skirt. There's no graceful way to climb over the basket wall to get in. So, you know, Scott had this and it worked out great. Here I am, I'm at the mouth of the balloon. You'll see our cables from the envelope are all hooked to the carabiners to the burner frame. This is all now assembled. And in ballooning, the only control we really have is up and down. And right here in the center of the balloon is what we call the parachute valve. During cold inflation and hot inflation, it is Velcroed in place. Once we get the balloon stood up, we pop all those tabs so that we can actually pull this valve down to let it heat out so we can descend. You know, it settles back up, we put heat in the envelope, we rise. Now we're getting ready to...
You just don't let it cool off.
Yeah, you try not to.
But I mean, for descent,
I'm sorry?
Say, for descending, you know, if you've got no obstacles or anything else, and you're not trying to hit a landing spot, you just don't not fuel it?
Well, you'll still fuel it because if not, you know, maximum velocity on a higher balloon is 922 feet per minute.
Lose the shape of the balloon or something?
Yeah, that can happen, and then you're really in trouble.
Yeah, it can happen very quickly.
Now, I'll talk about these lines here in a minute. This is one of the vehicles that we used to tie off to. There were 3 tie-off lines to keep us centered, keep us in the park.
So where do you tie off to the balloon or to the basket?
Our tether lines come down around to the side from the top, and then there's another hook or another connector that it's tied to one of the carabiners on the side of the basket. We've cold inflated using the fan, and now she's putting heat in it to get it to stand up. Once you have it all cold packed, it's all, I have no idea what this guy did here, but
And you notice the pilot's not even in the
once
basket.
he starts putting the heat in it, a few burns, and the heat causes the envelope to rise, and then we stand up and we're good to go. We're ready.
Once you've got it positioned, do you take off with fresh fuel tanks or do you?
No. The burning process, the only time we would do that was if we were in some kind of a distance competition. We would burn off of an external tank to inflate. But here's one of our tie-offs. This is one of our tie-off lines coming down and around. This is actually probably the crown line. So here we're ready to go. The passengers, we need to get the passengers in. More importantly, we need to get the radio equipment in. So when we're putting everything in here, most critical thing we had to make sure was that the radio equipment and the batteries and everything would be in a solid place so that they wouldn't move around. And then when we laid the antenna over the side of the basket, that it wasn't going to come in contact with anything metal on that balloon basket, including the fuel tanks.
Sure.
Especially the fuel tanks. So this was the first, I don't know which lift this was, but anyway, we took a banner up for POTA. Here you'll see better the tie-off line system that we used. Here's a line right here. Then you have the 2 on the other side. We had them in a triangular configuration, tied off to 3 different trucks. Now while here's the bottom of the antenna with the little tennis ball on this end of it. Actually, the height was probably more like 130 feet.
It didn't feel like it.
Well, I'm just saying because we always talk about, we're always responsible for top altitude, top of the assembly. So every time they came down, we had to get a hold of this and make sure they didn't come down and land on it and either crinkle the antenna or break it or do anything like that. But it was great because they went up in pairs, did their thing. I was surprised at how quickly we went through an hour and 15 minutes. It just didn't seem like it. Now, while they're in the air, I'm walking around, I'm watching the trees for any kind of wind direction changes that might be coming. One thing that we have to always be careful with when we're doing tether operations is what we call false lift. As the balloon comes down, air can be rushing over the top of it and hold the balloon up suspended, and we just think we're stuck, and then all of a sudden the wind will either change or it'll slow, and it'll drop us like a rock. So Lynn did a great job. She really did. They had soft landings every time that balloon came down, sat right on the ground. Obviously, us ground crew, we were there to put weight on just to make sure that she was good and stable, didn't do any bouncing or anything like that.
What's the rough distance of the balloon itself?
It was about 65 feet tall.
Okay. So you could do a halfway dipole if you wanted to. Would you ever consider using the top half from the top of the balloon to the basket as half of the?
No, there'd be no way to get the antenna up there with any kind of wire in it, and I would be concerned about the wire getting hot and damaging the envelope. You didn't see it, but like when we lay the basket over on the ground when we're starting to inflate, and we're laying on a tarp. We have a gasoline-powered fan that we're using, 28, 32-inch diameter blade. So it's moving somewhere between 28 and 33,000 cubic feet of air a minute. So we're cold packing that. The reason we use the tarp is so that we don't pick up any grass or any other debris and blow it into the envelope, because the first time she would light up, it would create all kinds of little embers and burn little holes in all over the balloon. So
Some nylon fabric that it's made of?
Nylon ripstop. The scoop and everything is Nomex. So, I took out the picture with the burned Nomex. We didn't burn it, it already was. So some summaries here. The radio operations, 108 contacts, 6 operators, hour and 15 minutes, operated mostly on 40 meters. Our flight operations, we did what we call 9 jumps, ups and downs, and we only used 30 gallons of fuel. Typically, we'd burn all 3 tanks for an hour flight. So we were very fuel efficient, but the cold air around us helped a lot. The colder it is, the more air we can go. That's why they do what they call these long jumps and these world championship runs and everything else during the dead of winter, because it's the coldest. Right.
There's a contacts map. You can see from 65, 70 feet up, you get pretty good reach with 40 meters. Both coasts into Canada, and a number of those operators made more than one contact with us, contacted more than one jump. So they stuck around and played radio with us.
Very cool.
Okay, any more questions?
When you gonna do it again?
There's no uniqueness to doing it again.
The second time doesn't do anything. That's the fun thing about it, was Dennis came up with I'm going to go back to a presentation I heard from a motivational speaker. Big idea, take small steps and write it down. Dennis had a big idea. He took a lot of small steps. I didn't even cover all of them.
Oh, I'm sure.
And now we got a record of it. So, anybody else?
Period that the gas was burning and it was off, or
The question again was,
how long was the gas burning to heat it up, and then when it stopped to lower it down to where you had to turn it on again?
It's a duty cycle.
yeah, the pilot determines that. I mean, there's, I think if you heard on the video with the drone, from the drone, and you heard the contacts, you heard the burner in the background, maybe every 5 minutes or so.
It's not bad.
No.
No. It was not intrusive at all. I will say we only got 2 instructions from Lynn when we got in. I stepped in and she said, "Don't touch the red handle." That was the shut-off valve.
Or the hoses.
She didn't say anything about the hoses. Don't touch the red handle. And then we're coming down, she said, "Bend your knees." Didn't need to. Didn't even feel that balloon touch down. Anything else? You mean recovered it or you're bored?
Did you notice any oddity to your RF since you're up in the air?
No.
So what was the noise for the receiver up there?
No, I don't know. It's a Yaesu. It's an ICOM. I couldn't tell.
It had to be really low. I mean, you had nothing around you for.
Yeah,
for noise.
I've operated in that park, and the noise level there is generally pretty quiet.
Yeah.
By the time we were up on the last lift, there were getting to be a lot of people on the band, so we were hearing some other conversations on the edge. But
And when did you spot? Well, I don't guess you self-spotted. Did you have anybody from your group spot, or did
Yeah.
the operator spot?
yeah, we spotted on POTA, on the POTA
And
website.
how did you list it? Did you notice that it was hot air balloon?
Did you, Dennis, when you spotted, did you put down you were hot air balloon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once the first contact was made where we said hot air balloon, game was on.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It got thick.
Dennis treated this like a CIA operation.
Yes.
We were sworn to secrecy, could tell nobody, because it had never been done before. It was,
And-
it was a very cool thing.
And there was somebody else who was looking to do
So
this.
minutes before we were ready to go up, I asked Dennis if I could put it on the POTA Facebook group page that we're going up in a hot air balloon, looks for us from this park on 40 meters. And so that was the first mention of it outside of this little group. And Dennis said, okay, go ahead. So I put it on the Facebook group that we were going up in a hot air balloon, had never been done. And so people had just minutes of warning who were watching that Facebook group page. And man, they showed up.
A little bit about why we were so secret about it. There's a guy on one of the Discord groups, his name is Shane Hale. He's studying to be a hot air balloon pilot in Texas, knows a lot of people with balloons, and he's a POTA guy and a ham radio guy. My fear was if he finds out about it, if I had found out about it and had access to what he has, I would have been all over it. You know, better weather, big areas, lots of balloon folks around, so we kept it quiet. And I've got to apologize. I found out not too long ago that you were a ham. I did not know this before then. Had I known then, you would have been up with us activating.
I had my duties to take care of. You know, I had to make sure all the paperwork was in order. I had to make sure the system was always safe and operating. Every time Lynn landed, I was in there at the basket, double checking all the fuel lines, all the fittings, looking for frost, looking for anything that could potentially be a trouble, especially when we're dealing with such a cold morning.
Yeah, it was chilly.
Because I mean, propane itself flashes off cold. If you get a leak, it gets worse. And we just couldn't have that. It's too dangerous.
Two more things, if I may. One, if you want to restore your faith in the youth of America, go sit down and have a chat with Lynn Brown. It was just absolutely excellent the way she stepped in at the last minute and took charge, and fantastic. And then two, my wife is not real fond of heights. She went up after we were all done, and then took her up to get a ride. On the way up, Lynn says, "Oh crap," and drops to her knees in the basket. Beth panics, says, "What's the matter?" Lynn looks up and says, "I just dropped my coffee." Lynn said if there had actually been a problem, she would have never known about it. So
On my second training flight, back in 97, 98, there's a hot air balloon pilot here in town, David Rapp. David has been very active in the Balloon Federation of America as a legal counsel. He's an attorney. He was my first flight instructor. Then Scott came along. But we had this distinguished looking guy and his wife get in the balloon one day, and we're all set to go. I burn. We're going up. Next thing I know, she is on the floor. She was scared. She was petrified of heights. So, we tried to get her to look at the horizon, don't look down, and everything. And we had purposely planned our flight logistics to land in a certain area. We missed it by a yard. I mean, not 3 feet, but 1 property yard. And turns out that the fellow that we were flying and his wife, he turns to us and he goes, "I'm really sorry about my wife." No problem. She didn't fall out. We didn't lose control of the balloon. Nothing like that. He was the president of TWA. She seldom flew in a jet. So, and the last comment that I want to make is, I had told you about the weather forecast. We finished at 9:15, I think it was. No, 10:45. At 11 o'clock, field conditions were 29 miles an hour. We just got it in. So it was a fun time. Dennis, thank you for doing it. Thank you for letting us be a part of it. It was a fun time.
Letting you be a part of it. You guys made it happen.
How many flights do you have on?
I'm at 190 flights. So I've got about, with training flights and everything, I'm about 225 hours.
Very good.
But I'm retired now. I don't fly anymore.
Okay, any thought about the Forest Park balloon race?
I'll go down there and I'll crew for anybody, but I'm not going to fly. Flying out of the city is nuts.
You had a question.
So what's your closest encounter with power lines?
I hit them.
You did?
I went through them.
We had a question over there.
Park years ago, and the hair took off and went like east, but by the time the hounds got inflated, the wind had died, so the balloons went up and maybe landed 100, 200 yards from where they took off. And then another time, we were living down in South City, and my wife and I come home, and down the street is a hot air balloon, and they're fairly low, and they're talking to people on the ground. Where's a good place to land? On the ground.
Just a word of advice.
A park.
If you're ever out in your yard early in the morning or kind of later in the evening, and you're in your backyard and a hot air balloon's flying by, be careful what you say, because we can hear every word of it.
Got another question.
And we
over
have
there.
seen some. We landed in a marijuana field one time in St. Charles County. That went over like a lead balloon. But
Under normal balloon operations, do you have contact with FA radio with you or something when you're talking or hearing the tower?
no.
No?
And the reason we don't is airspace in St. Louis is like an upside down birthday cake. It goes up, expands out, goes up, expands out, goes up. We are flying in uncontrolled airspace, D-airspace. So we don't have, unless, the only time we probably have to do that is if we're going to transition their space. Then, we have aircraft radios that we can communicate with them. But there's no need, they're busy with jets and everything else. They don't need to worry about us. Unless you're flying right across the tower like a couple of them have done.
So your balloons have the right of way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't want to get decorated with, Christmas wrapped with one, So, any other questions for Bill or myself?
I'll wrap it up with, we're going to do a meet and greet for POTA up at Pere Marquette Park, just down the parking lot from where we did this balloon activity. You're welcome to come out on Saturday, September 21. Bring something to eat, bring your radio, come and see what POTA's like. If you don't operate, if you do operate, come and play with us and meet some other POTA operators. No balloon this time.
We might be able to do something about that. Except That might be Forest Park weekend.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
And if that is, there won't be any balloons available.
Balloon to balloon POTA.
Huh?
Balloon to balloon POTA.
Right there. Oh, I think in Bill's section of the presentation, there was a question, and that was, can you use a radio in a hot air balloon? Obviously, that's why I got into amateur radio, because we were using them for communications between our teams and our vehicles and things. You can't use a cell phone in a hot air balloon, because when you're up in the air and your phone is out there and you go to make a call, you're pinging about 15 or 20 towers at the same time. So in theory, the FAA doesn't want you doing it. Everybody does. But there's no consequences. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for presenting. Thank you.